Hey folks, and welcome to this second video in the Profile Builder series. In this video, we'll take a look at how the Profile Builder handles properties. Now, properties are fundamental to how Rhapsody works, and there are a lot of them. The factory PRP alone has over 2,000. When you include the language PRP, we're talking over 5,000 properties. Now, it's very common for a profile to override the default values of some of those properties by providing a profile-specific PRP file. Creating those files by hand is a very laborious copy and paste process, but not anymore. Let's return to our Network Profile Builder, where we have a property file called root PRP. Now, it doesn't matter what this is called. As I mentioned in the last video, the Profile Builder will use this to create a PRP file with the same name as the profile, so that Rhapsody automatically loads it when that profile is used. Now, I can generate that PRP file right now using this menu. If I then ask the Profile Builder to show me the generated file in Windows Explorer, there's our new property file right next to our profile. Now, if I open that in a text editor, it is of course currently empty with only the required end keyword. So let's add some properties to it. But first, I'll switch on auto generation so I don't have to manually generate the property file every time. Here in the features view for this project, on the properties tab, we have an additional filter, profile building. Now, this is a property perspective, and it just makes consuming those thousands of properties easier by grouping them into tabs. And yes, the profile builder can create these as well. For now though, we'll just scroll down to property file creator and we'll set the option to auto generate those whenever we click save. Okay, let's add some properties to that PRP file. First, I'll define my own properties, which is very useful if you build your own helpers to go along with the profile. But then I'll also have the profile override some of the standard ones. Properties are organized by subject and meta class, so let's add those things first. Let's have a subject, we'll call that networking, and under that a meta class, and we'll call that automation. Then we can add various types of property. Let's add a boolean and we'll call it auto setup. Now, of course, this property won't do anything, but it's one we could use when we build our own helpers to control our own automation. Let's also give that property a description. Now, we could of course also do the same for the subject and the meta class. Why? Because the Rhapsody properties view has context-sensitive help, where you can indicate to your users exactly what that property does. The Profile Builder can generate those help files based on these descriptions. To enable that, we set this generate help file tag on the subject. Now, if I save, the Profile Builder auto-generates the PRP file, but also the help file, which we can see here in the output window. If I switch to the text editor, our PRP file now has our new property. Let's switch back to Rhapsody and set the user project as the active one. Now, here in the features window, in the properties tab, we can see that new property and also its context-sensitive help. Well, there we've added a new property, but what about overriding existing ones? Now, sure, we could add those same properties manually into our property file, but that's laborious, it's prone to error. Instead, let's reverse engineer the Rhapsody factory PRP file and use that. Now, of course, if you have your own property files and your own profiles, we can reverse engineer those as well. Now, we can choose to reverse engineer the entire file or only parts of it, which is a little more manageable maybe for that factory PRP file which has thousands of properties in it. So let's do that. Let's make our builder project the active one, and then we'll add a new property library. Now, property libraries are simply reusable containers for properties, but more importantly, they provide filter options for when we reverse engineer PRP files. Now, it doesn't matter what you call them. Let's call this one Rhapsody PRPs. In its tags, we can see the import options, including filtering the import by subject, by metaclass, or by property. Now, all three fields are comma-separated lists of regular expressions, and you can use a combination of any of the three. Let's just use the property field today. And we'll start simply by putting tooltip into that field. So any property with that exact string tooltip in its name will be imported. It doesn't matter what the subject or metaclass is. Now we can import a property file. Since this is the first time we've imported to this library, we get to select one. We'll select the factory PRP. Now, if I expand that library, there are the properties we've extracted from the Rhapsody PRP file based on our filters. Now, we can run successive imports with different filters, and we can have as many libraries as we want. Let's modify this one to also import any property that starts with the word auto. If we rerun the same import, then any new properties found using that filter in that file are also added into this library. Now we can change the default value of any of these properties right here in the model. We can now include these properties in our profiles PRP file, and we can do that in a few different ways. The simplest thing we can do is to drag the library under our root PRP. Generated PRP files automatically include any owned library content in their generated files. If I save and then switch to the text editor, all those properties in the library are now part of this PRP file. But we can also choose other strategies that keep the libraries more reusable. For example, let's move that library out of our PRP file again. And then we'll add a property file diagram. Let's call it includes. We'll drag on our root property file. And now we can add other things. We can drag on individual properties, or we can drag on collections that we want in our generated PRP file. Let's start with a single property from our library. And then we'll add an includes property dependency so that we'll get that in our generated file. We'll save, and then we'll switch to the text editor. And now our profile's PRP file only has that one overridden property in it. Let's go back to Rhapsody and we'll do something different. Let's delete that dependency. And instead, we'll drag on the entire library. And this time we'll use an includes collection dependency. If we save and then take a look at the generated PRP file, now it once again has all of those library properties in it. But what if we wanted to keep our properties in separate property files? No problem. Let's add a new property file into the model and we'll call it imported. Let's move the library under that file. Well, of course, we could instead use an include. And let's drag that new property file onto the diagram and we'll move the existing include. So now we have our root property file, which includes another property file, and that property file has a bunch of properties in it because it owns a library. Let's save and we'll switch to the text editor, and there we now have an include statement instead of all of the library properties. Now I can open that manually, of course, but if we go back to our model, I can ask the profile builder to open a property file along with all of its included files. And there is the content then of the included file. That was in a library, it's now in a separate property file. Now we can also have those included files generated into subfolders if we want. But that's it for this video. In the next one, we'll see how we can create property perspectives.